The eternal struggle is for real. Windows and Apple are like oil and water, or an actual window and an actual apple. Two very different things for very different purposes, but I guess you could buy something similar? Okay, that analogy fell apart pretty quickly. So when it comes to the mid-range laptop that you can use for both creativity and productivity tasks, which comes out on top when we compare the brand new 2021 3060 version of the Razer Blade 15 and the M1 version of the juggernaut that is the MacBook Pro 13? Let's find out. I'm not slamming them down because if I touch the Razer, it's going to get fingerprint smudges on it, and I hate that for the videos. What's up, everyone? I'm the Everyday Dad, and if I can figure it out, you can figure it out. These two brands are, I don't even know that I'd call them brands so much as philosophical differences. These are always competing to see which is the best, and sometimes even the CPU manufacturers get in on the action. Probably wouldn't do that again if I were you, though. Intel, just you do you. I wouldn't make those ads again. I do, though, think that both have their place, and I think both are actually pretty darn good for the asking price. And as both have pretty similar asking prices, I constantly get questions on which someone should get. So that's how we arrived at this spot in time. First off, let's cover the ordering information and spec lists of the two computers if this is your first time about hearing one of these awesome pieces of technology. And if it is, you're probably new here, and welcome. Thanks for joining us. Let's start off with the Razer Blade 15 base model. Yes, it's actually the base model. This is the cheapest version, but they also call it the base option, but there's a base option that's not the cheapest, so yes, it's confusing. Life can sometimes be confusing. The 2021 version of the Razer Blade 15 base model is pretty darn similar. You can read that as almost exactly the same as the 2020 version, and for that similarity of price, will run you a similar cost of $1,699. At this price point, you'll get the 6-core Intel i7 10750 processor, 16 gigabytes of DDR4 memory, and a 512 gigabyte solid-state drive. On top of that, you'll also get the NVIDIA RTX 3060 graphics card. That's the new bit, by the way. At this base model, you'll also get a 144 Hz 1080p panel to be your monitor. There are a couple of other versions of this laptop out there. You could get one with a 3070 graphics card and even an option with a QHD 165 Hz refresh rate monitor for $2199. Pretty expensive, but that's actually a pretty darn powerful computer. On the other hand, the newest version of the M1 MacBook Pro 13 is vastly different than its previous iterations. This base model, it's not called the base model, I'm just calling this the cheapest version of the base model, and I'm doing this as an aside here, as a joke against the other base model, but we're talking about this joke so long that it's gone very stale, and we're gonna stop. This will run you $1,299, and at this price point, you get the 8-core Apple M1 chip, 8 gigabytes of unified memory, that's the RAM if you don't know, 256 gigabyte solid-state drive, and an 8-core integrated GPU. Though if we were going to aim to match the cost of the Razer, you could pick either 16 gigabytes of unified memory or a 1 terabyte solid-state drive for $1699. I'd probably go with the 16 gigabytes of memory, personally. And at the top end of the MacBook Pro 13, you can get a version with 16 gigabytes of memory and a 2 terabyte solid-state drive, and that will run you $2299 or less if you buy refurbished, but I've got a whole video about that you can check out. It's going to be like right here. So on the whole, both computers are not too shabby, and if you are looking at their lowest end configuration, you can get pretty good deals for the power that you actually buy. That's enough. Let's stop with the happy-go-lucky, everyone gets a trophy part of the video and get to where these win and where they lose against each other. We're going to gladiatorially pit these against each other now because the happy time is over. Let's start off with the power. It is kind of hard to place both computers directly against each other for power, as they do approach processing slightly differently. The Razer is on a traditional Windows x86 operating system, and the M1 Mac is running on an ARM-based version of Mac OS. So as much as I hate them, let's do a couple of quick benchmarks just to see where we start off as sort of baselining things before we start talking about subjective things. For clarification, these benchmarks were run on the base model Razer Blade and the 16 gigabyte version of the M1 MacBook Pro 13. For the first benchmark, we did the pretty standard Cinebench R23. This is a pure test of the single core and multi-core performance of a CPU, so when we run both of the computers through here, it should come as no surprise, since this is the 2021 version of the Razer Blade 15, but it's running an older generation of Intel processors. This gets totally spanked by the MacBook Pro 13 in both single core and multi-core. Generally, like even in places where Intel normally dominates, that single core performance we talked about earlier, the M1 just trounces it. This is one of the places where I'm pretty disappointed in the Razer lineup as of today. They put the exact same older processors in without moving up to either the new Ryzen series of chips or even the 11th generation Intel options. Now, I know there isn't a direct 11th gen replacement yet for the 10750 or 10850, but come on. Come on, this performance is pretty rough when it comes to a big, bulky gaming computer. The MacBook is a small, light Ultrabook, and that's just not a good look. But it's not all about the CPU. Like I say a lot, we have all the power we could ever want, so it's not all about the CPU. Sometimes we might want to run graphically intense tasks too, and with its RTX 3060, the Razer does start to come back a bit. When rendering 4K video in the same program, DaVinci Resolve, the Razer Blade is able to render twice as fast as the MacBook Pro 13. This easily maintains above 60 frames per second rendering, which, as all of these videos are shot in 30 frames per second, that keeps it in the 2 times real completion rate, which I consider to be the high mark for creative laptops. The MacBook Pro 13 rendering the same file on the same program will only be able to maintain 30 frames per second or at real time because DaVinci is very GPU dependent, and the MacBook does not have a dedicated graphics card. 30 frames per second is still pretty good when it comes to a small, light computer, so it's the Razer is more powerful, the Mac isn't bad, and if video editing is your thing, you'll get roughly the same rendering speed out of Final Cut Pro on the Mac as you would in DaVinci on the Razer. I can't show you on the Razer though, because Final Cut is only on Mac. And when it comes to video gaming, I don't do much of it, but in a few quick tests on my brand new WoW Classic Warrior, even pushing the max graphical settings on the MacBook, it's easily able to maintain 60 frames per second as I dart around bringing peace and safety to the local denizens of Ironforge. However, when doing the same thing on the Razer Blade 15, this can easily maintain 100 frames per second, and you'll be able to see that extra speed because the monitor is a 144 Hz refresh rate panel, so it will look and play much smoother on the PC. Plus, if you are into VR, I'm able to easily play Half-Life Alyx on the Razer Blade, and that's probably the most graphically intense game I own. The RTX 3000 series of graphics card, they are pretty awesome advancements, so it should come as no surprise, but if you want a gaming machine, go Windows. But for literally every other application when it comes to productivity or even creativity, I'd easily recommend the Mac. Okay, we've got power out of the way, but what about portability? You know, the reason that you buy a laptop instead of a desktop computer because your computer's planning on moving somewhere. I guess unless you're one of those very dedicated people that bring their iMac with them everywhere. I've seen it. I've seen the tweets, folks. I think there are a couple of things that really lend to portability outside of the physical size of the computers. Obviously, yes, the MacBook Pro 13 is a 13-inch laptop, so it is objectively smaller and more portable than the Razer Blade 15. But it's not that much of a difference once you get them both into a backpack. However, there are 2 gigantic factors that have the MacBook way ahead. One, it has 20 hours of battery life. That's a ridiculous amount that nothing else in the market comes close to. So because of this, you don't need to bring batteries, you don't need to bring charging bricks or anything else, because if you are using the MacBook Pro 13, it will not run out during a workday. Plus, number 2, when you are on that battery life, you get the full functionality of that 8-core CPU. There is no throttling or there is no limiting of power if you are not directly connected to the wall. Double plus for this is if you are in like a work meeting, and I mean, this makes literally no noise, so you won't irritate people in the office with obnoxious amounts of fan noise while somebody is trying to explain their PowerPoint presentation. I'm not saying that happens on Windows machines all the time, but come to your own conclusion. The Razer, on the other hand, is a Windows machine, and it has, by itself, it has decent battery life. But because of the Windows architecture, you will absolutely lose a chunk of CPU power, which, as we've already seen, is already limited when traveling and not explicitly plugged into power. So in addition to the laptop, you'll have to bring along the charging brick, and because Windows CPU need more actual power, the brick's not small or lightweight. And this is something that I definitely noticed when running the earlier benchmarks. Even when in a perfect, thermally optimized location, this is going to be loud. The laptop is going to make noise if you do any heavy lifting with the Razer. Sure, you could say get one of the Razer books or something similar if you need a productivity, but quote-unquote productivity laptops from Windows, those machines rarely have dedicated graphics card. And if you need a computer to get anything creative done, why get the one without the graphics card? Integrated graphics on Windows, it's kind of meh. Believe me, I wish there was a Windows machine that stacked up to the M1 Max from a portability standpoint. I really do. When it comes to thermal performance, I think both computers do fine. I haven't had a single thermal throttling problem on either, no matter what I've thrown at them. You'll just have to be prepared for the compensation on the Razer You trade thermal performance for noise. And lastly, let's talk about usability. For one part of this, I do think that the Razer pulls ahead if you are looking for a computer to plug into a system and be a dual-use travel/desktop replacement computer. Both of these machines do have Thunderbolt 3 ports built into them. The MacBook Pro 13 has 2 and the Razer Blade has 1. But despite having double, that's all the MacBook has. And yes, I really do like the versatility of Thunderbolt 3, but I don't like that I then have to spend more money to get a dongle or a dock to unlock that capability. At the very least, I wish they would do something like what Dell does with the XPS 15 line and include at bare minimum the HDMI dongle in the box instead of charging $60 or $70 for it after the fact. Even though it doesn't come with a dongle, the Razer does not have this problem because while it only has one Thunderbolt 3 port, it has 3 USB-A ports, an extra USB-C port, and HDMI and Ethernet built right into the body of the computer. I think when it comes to laptop design, we can reach a point real quick where the laptops are built too small because there are always things like monitors, keyboards, etc. that we are going to want to plug into if we're working from home. And as we are way past the time when companies have transitioned away from desktop for their employees, I mean, look, everybody gets a laptop now. So those laptops with working from home absolutely have to pull double duty, and it's so much easier to pull that double duty when the laptop has all of the I/O that you need built right into it. The last usability thing that I do want to talk about though is the actual body of the computers, and here the MacBook does win here in my opinion. It's got the much better keyboard, the much better trackpad, and it's pretty enjoyable to work on for long periods of time. It's not as good as the MacBook Air, but it's pretty darn good for what it is. The Razer has an okay keyboard and an okay trackpad. The keys are kind of mushy, listen. They're kind of mushy, and the trackpad is pretty standard for a Windows laptop, so it's functional, but you'll still probably need to bring a mouse with you at the bare minimum. I mean, because Windows trackpads, they're kind of meh. But at the end of the day, so what, right? If you need a portable productivity machine, there isn't anything else in the market that competes with the M1 MacBook Pro 13. This is easily the best with its fantastic power that needs very little energy to maintain, battery life that's hilarious to compare to other computers, and the best keyboard in the business. Plus, as a bonus, it's so quiet, you'd swear this thing didn't actually have a fan built into it. Plus, with them now on the Apple refurbished website, you can get them at prices that no Windows machine could touch either. This is an industry-leading computer without any doubt. The Razer isn't bad when compared to other Windows machines, but it's using an older processor that can't really keep up with what else is out there. And while the laptop itself is small, the required accoutrements are actually pretty big. But if you do want a computer that can do video editing, productivity, and legit gaming all in one, I would recommend this version, at least until there is a model that has a Ryzen processor under the hood. Plus, if you are trying to save some money on the Razer, I'd go with last year's model with that 2060 graphics card. You'll get 95% of the power for a lot less money. And who doesn't like saving money? I like saving money. I gotta buy all these laptops. I like saving money. And if you liked this video and you want to see more about either of these computers, I'll leave their own dedicated videos right here. Well, you can't see it because it's right here. I'll leave both of their dedicated videos right here for you to find. You can click right here. Click, 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 click. The laptop blocked it. Thanks for watching.